The finger came before the words. One moment Adiz Nwasu was standing near the window with a glass of sparkling water and a smile she was mostly faking. And the next moment, a woman she had never seen before was pointing across the ballroom like Adiz owed her something. That woman, Myra, Sung's voice arrived before she did, sharp and clean through the low hum of the evening, the voice of someone who had never once second-guessed herself in her life. She took it. The room didn't stop all at once. It hesitated. That particular hesitation of a crowd that hasn't understood what it's witnessing yet, but already senses something is wrong. Conversations dipped. Someone's laughter died mid-note. Eyes moved in the careful sideways way of people who want to watch without being caught watching. Adiz turned slowly. She took in all of it, the finger, the woman behind it, the expression on that woman's face, absolute and immovable, the expression of someone who had already decided and was simply now informing the room. The security guard near the far wall had already shifted his weight in her direction. And something rose in Adiz's chest that was not panic, was not confusion, was the very specific, very familiar burn of a woman who knows exactly what is happening and exactly why it is happening, and has maybe 4 seconds to decide how she wants to handle it. I'm sorry. Her voice came out even, measured, completely in control. Are you actually serious right now? Sung moved forward. She was extraordinary to look at, floor-length emerald gown, jewelry that announced itself the moment she walked into a room, the kind of woman who didn't enter spaces so much as occupy them. You were standing right there. I watched you. I was standing in a room, Adiz said, with roughly 200 other people. The bracelet is mine. It came in on my wrist. It will leave on my wrist. It looks exactly. Then perhaps, Adiz said, and now her voice had gone somewhere quieter, somewhere that required more respect to enter. You should be very certain before you point at someone in a room this size. Sung's eyes went briefly to the bracelet on Adiz's wrist. Just for a moment, just long enough. Something moved through her expression, something that was not doubt exactly, but something adjacent to it, something she immediately buried beneath the more powerful thing, which was the fact that she had already committed to this, publicly, loudly, and was not the kind of woman who reversed in front of an audience. The security guard reached Adiz. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to don't. Adiz raised one hand, not aggressive, just final, just a wall. Do not put your hands on me. We just need to clarify, I said do not touch me. The guard stopped. Sung stepped closer. Her eyes fixed on the bracelet with an intensity that had stopped registering anything else in the room. And then, before anyone could anticipate it, her hand came forward. Adiz saw it coming. She reached up. Too late. The bracelet snapped away from her wrist with one sharp motion and landed on the marble floor with a small, bright sound that somehow silenced the last of the remaining conversations in the room the way a single note can silence an orchestra. And in that exact moment, everything in that room shifted completely. Stay with me, because what happens next? No one in that ballroom was prepared for it. And if you're into stories like this, take 1 second to hit like and subscribe before we go further. Adiz stood with her hand still raised, her wrist bare, the bracelet on the floor between them and the full weight of 200 people and a stopped string quartet pressing in from all sides. Then she found her voice. You just put your hands on me. Quiet, the specific quality of quiet that fills a room and keeps filling it. In front of every single person in this building, you grabbed me. Like I was nothing. Like I had no right to what was already mine. Sung's chin lifted. I was protecting. You took something off my body, Adiz said, and her voice was very soft and very precise and somehow more devastating for both of those things. The fury in it completely controlled. The kind that doesn't shake because it doesn't need to. The kind that comes from a woman who has climbed too far and worked too hard to be standing in a room she was invited into and being treated like a thief. I am a guest here. I have done nothing wrong. And you just grabbed me. Security. Nobody, Adiz said, turning to the guard with a look that stopped him mid-step, is removing me from anywhere. The room was frozen. Then from somewhere near the display table, a man moved. Kwon Hyun-yi didn't rush. He didn't make a show of it. He walked to the edge of the display, bent once, and straightened with something in his hand. The bracelet caught the overhead light. The silence in the room thickened. This, he said calmly, was on the floor, beside the display stand. He let the pause sit. His eyes moved, not to Adiz, to Sung, with the quiet directness of a man who needed no further words because the room had already done the work. The shift was immediate and visible. Eyes moved. Expressions changed. The math of what had happened was now very simple and very public, and everyone in that room was doing it. Sung's composure fractured just slightly, just long enough to be seen. Then she tried to seal it back. That doesn't mean she wasn't near, wasn't what? A voice from the center of the crowd. She wasn't doing anything. Someone else. Sung looked around and found no hands raised for her, no faces offering her cover, just a room full of people who had watched the whole thing and were no longer uncertain about what they'd seen. She opened her mouth. I was simply looking out for the event. You tore a bracelet off a woman's arm, a man near the front said plainly in front of everyone. Adiz looked at Sung across the floor between them. One long look. The look of a woman who knows the room is hers right now and is going to use it carefully. I hope, Adiz said quietly, that whatever you were trying to accomplish tonight was worth the cost of it. She crouched, picked up her bracelet herself, pressed it into her palm, picked up her clutch and walked toward the door. The crowd opened for her without being asked. Behind her, the murmur rose and kept rising. Every eye still in that ballroom belonged to Sung now, the woman who had pointed, who had grabbed, who had been catastrophically, publicly wrong, and who had doubled down on every step of it. She stood in the middle of all of it, alone. Hyun-yi had been watching from the moment Sung's finger went up. He understood within seconds what was happening. He also understood, because he had spent years watching Myra Sung operate, that she had not required evidence. She had required a target, and she had selected one. By the time Adiz reached the door, Hyun-yi was already moving, not toward the crowd, toward the exit. He found her on the steps outside, not crying, not calling anyone, just standing in the evening air with her clutch held in both hands, jaw set, breathing with the deliberate steadiness of a woman managing something enormous in a very contained space. He stopped a few feet back, close enough to speak, far enough to give her what she needed. Adiz turned. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, fully, without hurry. If you came here to smooth this over on her behalf, I didn't, Hyun-yi said. A pause, then what do you want? To make sure you're all right. She studied him, looking for the angle in it, the damage control, the careful professional management of a scene. She found none. I'm fine, she said. I just need a moment. He nodded. He didn't move toward her. He didn't fill the space with words it didn't require. She looked at him again after a moment. You picked it up. He nodded once. It needed doing. You were the only person in that room who didn't look like they were waiting to see which way it would go. Then you already know I didn't take anything. I knew before I even picked it up, Hyun-yi said. Adiz held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to the city, the ordinary, unremarkable city moving along at its own pace, completely undisturbed by what had just happened on the 4th floor of that building. Hyun-yi stayed. That was the thing that surprised her. He had said what he came to say and he didn't leave. Not pressing, not performing, just there. Present in the way that certain people are solid without agenda. When her car arrived, she turned to him. Who is she to you? A pause. My father's wife. Adiz absorbed that. Nodded once, the nod of a woman storing information precisely, and got into the car. He went back inside. He found Sung at the bar, already recomposed, already carrying herself with the ease of someone for whom the evening had been largely unremarkable. He stepped beside her and let his presence announce itself. She felt it before she turned. Hyun-yi, come with me. He walked her to a quiet corner of the room and faced her without preamble, without softness, with the steadiness of a man who had already decided what needed to be said. What you did tonight was wrong. I was protecting. You grabbed a bracelet off a woman's wrist in front of this entire room on the basis of nothing. It looked exactly like. Hyun-yi held her eyes without blinking. Every person in that room knows what it looked like now, and you will address that with her directly. He paused. I'm telling you now so it isn't a surprise when that becomes necessary. He turned and walked away before she could respond. Sung stood alone in her corner with the expression of a woman who has no current intention of doing what she's been told. But who is, for the first time in longer than she can remember, not entirely certain of the ground beneath her. Adiz Enwasu had built her consultancy from the ground up, and she meant that literally, not from introductions made at the right dinner, not from capital handed to her by people who knew her family, from work, the kind of work that doesn't announce itself, that starts in the dark before most people have opened their eyes and ends long after the city has stopped noticing. 5 years ago, she had 2 clients, a sublet desk and a shared office, and a second-hand laptop she had named privately and would never admit to. She used to bring lunch from home because buying it felt like spending money she hadn't fully earned yet. Now she led a team of 15, held 3 ongoing institutional contracts, and had a name in her field that arrived in rooms before she did. She was not the kind of known that required a publicist. She moved quietly. But she had built something real, something entirely her own, and she moved through the world with the particular unhurried confidence of a woman who has already answered the question of her own worth and is simply no longer entertaining it as a question. She told her closest friend about the gala the next morning over breakfast at the bakery around the corner from her office. She grabbed it right off my wrist. Grabbed it, her friend repeated. In front of everyone. In front of everyone. Her friend stared at her. And you didn't, I kept it together, Adiz said. She wrapped both hands around her tea. Barely. But I kept it together. Good. She took a sip. I put it away after that. And she meant it fully. She put it down the way she always put things down, by going back to work, by keeping her eyes on what was directly in front of her, by refusing to give a bad evening more territory in her life than it had earned. 3 weeks later, she was on a walkthrough of a new commercial space, a mixed-use building mid-renovation that her consultancy had just been contracted to advise on, the kind of project that reminded her precisely why she had started the whole thing. She was moving through the ground floor with her notebook and her eye, completely in her element, making notes, calculating sight lines, rethinking the entrance flow in her head. Voices from the upper level. She looked up. Hyeon-yi looked down. The recognition was immediate on both sides and equal. He came down. She didn't move toward him or away from him. She waited because that was what she did. Ms. Nwasu, you know my name, she said. I looked you up after that night, Hyeon-yi said. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Adiz looked at him steadily. You looked me up. Yes, she tilted her head slightly. That's either genuinely thoughtful or mildly unsettling. Probably both. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. The shape of the intention. I was fine, she said. I was fine that night once I had a minute. I know, he said. I'm sorry for what happened. You didn't cause it. I know. He paused. I'm sorry regardless. She looked at him for a moment, the directness of him, the absence of decoration in the way he spoke. You're connected to this building, she said. It wasn't a question. She had looked him up too after the gala. She always looked. He confirmed it, silent stakeholder. She thought about that. Then the woman at the gala is your father's wife. Yes, that must make things interesting, she said. It does. A pause settled between them, comfortable somehow for 2 people who barely knew each other and had met under the worst possible circumstances. There's a coffee place around the corner, Hyeon-yi said. Nothing elaborate, just coffee. She looked around at the raw, unfinished space, the exposed beams, the dust and the light, the work not yet done. Then back at him. Coffee, she said. Fine. Coffee became 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours became dinner, his suggestion, a quiet place with no occasion attached to it, no performance expected from either side. Then another dinner. Then a third. A fourth. They settled into something without formally nomming it. The particular rhythm of 2 people who are both too self-aware to deny what's happening and too careful to rush toward it. Hyeon-yi pursued Adiz the way he seemed to do everything, quietly, deliberately, without crowding her. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered things she hadn't realized she'd emphasized. The project she described once with more feeling than she'd intended. The way she always moved to the window when she was thinking. The specific details she'd mentioned about her first real breakthrough client, offhand, weeks earlier, that he brought back perfectly in context. He didn't perform remembering. He just remembered because he was paying attention. Adiz noticed. She didn't comment on it, but she noticed. She was also slowly understanding that Hyeon-yi was carrying something. The specific gravity of a man whose family had reorganized itself around someone new and hadn't quite resettled. The loneliness that can exist inside a life that, from the outside, looks entirely sufficient. He didn't say it plainly. It came through in other ways, in the care with which he listened when she talked about building something of her own, in the things he moved around in conversation, in the quality of his attention when she talked about work and intention and choosing your own life on purpose. She recognized it. She had a version of it herself, the particular solitude of a woman who had worked so single-mindedly for so long that she had arrived at something excellent and found herself there mostly alone. They were, she thought one evening, walking back toward her car, more similar than they looked from the outside. She called her friend. I think I actually like him, she said. Is that a problem? She thought about it seriously for a moment. Ask me in 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, she already knew. Hyun-yi brought up his father one evening over dinner. Not unwell, but moving slower than before with the particular awareness of a man for whom certain timings had begun to feel specific. He wanted them to come for a family meal. He wanted to meet Adiz. Adiz set down her fork. Myra Sung will be there. Yes. She looked at him directly. Then I need you to hear something from me before I agree to any of this. I'm not coming to your father's home to sit at his table and absorb a second version of what happened at that event. I'm not walking into that house to be treated like an outsider or an oversight. If she has things to say, she says them to your face, not at mine. I'm putting that on the table right now, clearly, so we both know where we stand. That's fair, Hyun-yi said. I mean every word. I know you do, he said. And I hear all of it. She held his gaze for a long moment. One dinner. She arrived at the Kwon house on a Sunday evening in a well-cut burgundy dress, hair back, nothing about her apologetic or uncertain, entirely herself. Kwon Di-won opened the door himself, and the warmth of him was immediate, genuine, uncomplicated, the warmth of a man who had hoped to like this person and had confirmed it within the first 30 seconds. Ms. Nwasu, please come in. The house felt lived in the good way, full of the particular warmth of a home that has held many years and not tried to erase any of them. Adiz liked it immediately. Sung was in the sitting room. Their eyes met across it. Recognition. Immediate. And beneath it, on Sung's side, something that had not quite prepared itself for how steady Adiz would be, how naturally she moved through the room, how warmly D1 was already speaking to her, as though she had always been expected, as though she already belonged. Dinner began. The first half was pleasant enough, surface conversation, careful and exploratory, the polite testing of a new arrangement. D1 asked about her work with genuine interest, listened to her answers with the full attention of a man who respected the act of making something. Hyun-yi sat beside her, present and steady. Adiz was warm and direct and completely at ease. Then Sung began, softly at first, so subtle it could almost pass for nothing. It must be rewarding, running your own small practice. Small, D1 said pleasantly. My understanding is it's quite a well-regarded firm. Of course, Sung said with a smile that existed only in the lower half of her face, for what it is. Adiz met her eyes across the table, said nothing, moved forward. And your family, are they nearby? Some of them, Adiz said, were scattered. MHM. And your parents, what did they do? My father ran a logistics business. My mother was a midwife. How lovely, Sung said, the word carrying absolutely nothing of loveliness. Adiz held her gaze for one calm beat, then picked up her water glass, took a quiet sip, set it back down. Then Sung's eyes moved to the bracelet on Adiz's wrist. The same one. Adiz had put it on deliberately. She wasn't entirely sure whether it was a statement or simply the refusal to let something that was hers become something she hid. Sung's gaze sat on it a moment too long. That bracelet, she said, measured. Isn't that the one from? Yes, Adiz said simply, clearly, without apology. It is. The table stilled. Sung looked at her across the candles and the serving dishes and the careful arrangement of a family dinner and said what she had apparently decided to say. There are simply some circles that don't overlap, some rooms where certain people will always be visitors, no matter how polished the presentation. Some things are not about effort, they're about fit. The table waited. Adiz set her fork down gently. She looked at Sung with the complete, unhurried calm of a woman who has been waiting for this exact moment and arrived prepared for it. You're right, Adiz said. Her voice was even. Some people will always be visitors at certain tables. A pause. The mistake you're making is thinking that applies to me. Her eyes held Sung's without moving. You were brought to this table. Another pause. I would have built one. She picked up her fork and returned to her food. But what would I know about that? The table was perfectly, completely still. D1 made a sound deep in his throat that was very nearly a laugh before he quietly recovered. Sung's expression shifted. Something moved beneath the surface of it, and she reached for the last thing she had. His mother, she said, quietly, precisely, the particular precision of a woman selecting a weapon. His real mother was a woman of genuine elegance, of tradition, of the values that actually matter. She never would have. The sound of Hyun-yi's chair was not loud. It didn't need to be. Every face at the table turned. Hyun-yi was looking at Sung with an expression that had nothing managed about it, nothing arranged for the sake of keeping the evening intact. Never. The word arrived quietly and took up the entire room. Bring her name into this, in this house, at this table. Ever again. The silence that followed was dense and complete. Even Adiz sat still. D1 looked down at his plate. Sung closed her mouth. The silence held itself, long and absolute and irreversible. Hyeon-yi looked around the table at his father, at Adiz, and when he spoke again, his voice had returned to something steadier but no less decided. "Not here," he said. "Not to her, not again." Dinner ended not long after. D1 found Adiz at the door and apologized privately, quietly, with the genuine shame of a man who knew something had gone wrong at his own table and could not fully account for how he had let it. Adiz received it graciously. She could see plainly it was not his doing. Outside, Hyeon-yi walked her to her car. The night was cool and still. Adiz wasn't angry. She was clear, that clean, settled quality of a woman who has seen a thing for exactly what it is and is now deciding what to do with the information. "She won't change," Adiz said. "Not entirely," Hyeon-yi said. "No, then I need you to tell me honestly what that means for us." Hyeon-yi stood in front of her in the quiet of the driveway and looked at her with the directness she had come to trust above almost every other thing about him. "It means she doesn't have a vote," he said. "My father does. You saw him tonight. You saw what he thought of you." A pause. "Sung doesn't." Adiz looked at him steadily. "And if this gets complicated, then it gets complicated." No hesitation. "I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. And she believed him, not out of need, not out of hope, but because she had spent months watching the distance between what this man said and what he actually did. She had never once found them to be different things. "Neither am I," she said. D1 handled it himself. The old man, slowed down but in no way diminished, sat his wife down and said the things that had been building for considerably longer than just that dinner. About the evening at the gala. About what he had witnessed at his own table with his own eyes. About the woman his son had chosen and what the choice said about the man his son had become. Sung had no room around her, no crowd to move through, no performance to stage, just her husband looking at her with the specific disappointment of a man who had expected better and was no longer willing to pretend he hadn't. Adiz had already made her decision. She was done. Not only with Sung, but with everything still attached to that night, including, she had decided, Hyeon-yi. She had worked too hard for her peace to spend her life renegotiating it. Sung came to Adiz's office 3 days later, alone, during business hours. Into Adiz's space, the office Adiz had leased with her own first serious contract, the shelves holding the projects she was proudest of, the walls covered in her process, every single surface carrying the quiet weight of something built entirely from scratch. Adiz looked up from her desk and saw Sung standing in the doorway. She said nothing. She waited. Sung came in. She took in the office slowly, the way a person does when a space is saying something to them they hadn't anticipated. Then she turned. "I was wrong," Sung said. The words were not easy for her, that was evident. "At the event at dinner." A pause. "I misjudged you." Adiz didn't answer immediately. She took her time the way she always did. "Yes," she said finally, "you did." Silence sat between them. "I'm not asking for friendship," Adiz said. "I'm not asking for anything beyond basic respect. No performance, no revision of history, just respect." Sung held her gaze. "You'll have it." It wasn't warmth. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was real, and it was something, and it was freely given. That evening, Hyeon-yi took her somewhere she had mentioned exactly once, in passing, in a conversation she wasn't even sure he had been fully tracking at the time. He had been fully tracking it. A rooftop restaurant with a view of the city she had spent 5 years making her life in. No occasion. No announcement. Just a table and the skyline and the uncomplicated ease of 2 people who have been through something real together and come out the other side. Still standing, still chosen. Adiz looked at him across the table with the city below them and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Settled. Completely, quietly settled. The specific stillness of a woman who is not waiting for the next difficulty and is simply present. "You remembered," she said. "I remember everything you tell me," Hyeon-yi said. She smiled, a real one, fully unguarded, completely her own. "That's either very kind," she said, "or genuinely alarming." Hyeon-yi looked at her across the candlelight with the expression of a man who has found something he wasn't searching for and has made, quietly and entirely without announcement, the decision to hold on to it. "Then I'll be both," he said. Adiz laughed. And the city moved beneath them, unhurried and indifferent, belonging to no one's schedule but its own. And just like that, the woman they tried to diminish walked away with the one thing they couldn't take, reassign, or question. not a seat at a table, not someone else's approval, her own. If you stayed all the way to the end, then you already understand some people don't wait to be let in. They build the door themselves. If that hit the way it should, hit like and subscribe. There's more where this came from.